Welcome back to another episode of Projecting Grandeur. I'm your host, Ron Dichter. Thanks for tuning in. Today I just want to riff a little bit. I've been thinking a lot about my own life and kind of trying to figure out, when you go through the world and life of startup, it's rocky and bumpy and not really smooth. And I've talked about kind of the comparison of starting a business to spaghetti, and that you think everything is going to be this perfectly straight line. However, once you get cooking or the plan starts getting into motion, that spaghetti goes from this, very straight, stiff, rigid line into this kind of curvy, noodle, kind of a way. And so as I think about like my own journey here, as I get back into startup mode, how as an entrepreneur do you pick yourself up when you're down? And we all go through this. We all have these times where things aren't perfect, and as the owner and the entrepreneur, oftentimes you're never dealing with the perfect. You hired someone to execute on the perfect, and now you're figuring out the imperfect to try to make whatever it is you're working on better, so that you can then hire somebody to then implement the process. But there is not a day that goes by where an entrepreneur is not going to be faced with some challenge in their day that makes them question why they're doing what they're doing. And that's normal. And if you're going through that, you're not alone. There's a lot of times where I personally do the same thing. Like right now, in my business, there's a lot of things that are going great, but there's also a lot of things that are just not great. And then there are other things where, I have set an expectation and, I am not achieving that expectation. So therefore I am perceiving it to be a total disaster. However, the reality is that it's just not working as good as I want it to be, but it's still working. And, so going back to the topic here of like, how do you pick yourself up when you're down? And I think there's some important things that personally I do that I'm going to share with you that hopefully will help you. But I also think there's some opportunity where you need to look objectively at your business, look objectively at your team, and realize or decide, are there things that are happening in the business, or there are people that you have involved in the business that are actually making it harder to pick yourself up because they're the source of your down, negativity, whatever it is. And so as I start thinking about my journey and some of the things that I'm going through, I start to try to look at things from an outward lens first. Meaning, I've mentioned this before, but I am probably one of the most critical reviewers of my own self, and it's very easy for me to get down on myself, and that's partly because I have really high expectations and I expect a lot from me, and when I'm not delivering that, it definitely has an impact. And you've got to again be objective about it and say, well, maybe I'm not meeting the expectations of myself. Is the business succeeding? Is the business maybe not firing on all cylinders, but is it still firing? And if the answer is yes, then again you just need to be objective about like trying to be aware of like, okay, like yes, I may be down because I'm not reaching the success or the expectations of my my own self-imposed goals, but that doesn't mean that I'm a total failure or that the business is a total train wreck. So obviously having that awareness, being objective about it is one of the things. The other thing that I really try to do when I'm down is I try to really simplify what it is that I can do today to feel better about whatever state of mind I'm in, and having some sort of smaller digestible win helps me to kind of shake that negative thought or that negative moment in time that I might be going through. And so let's say I'm looking at things from a 10,000 foot view, and I have these big grand plans that I want to accomplish, but none of them can be accomplished in a day. What I'll try to do is zero in on a particular component or piece of that macro goal, and try to find something that I can win or be successful at in a day or a week, and set like a mini goal to do that. And what that helps me to do is really have that win, show progress, and while it might not be achieving the big goal, it's one step closer to achieving that big goal. And I think having those small wins help. Again, as an entrepreneur, most of the time you're dealing with the bad, right? You're dealing with the things that are either broken or don't exist, and it's your job to put those things in place so that you can then hire somebody to execute on the process that gets built out. And so a lot of your emotional state is going to be driven around your ability to understand that, because if 90% of your day is spent dealing with either the bad or the unknown or the doesn't even exist and you have to create it, like it's going to be way easy for you to really beat yourself up and get down. And so having those little wins along the way, I think will really help you to pick yourself up when you're in a slump. The next thing that I try to do is I try to look at like the source of what exactly it is that's making me upset. And so in my business, I've got a new distribution model that I have launched. And inside of this distribution model, one of the things that I'm really trying to focus on is being able to expand what I'm doing without necessarily being able to, or having the requirement of expanding my internal staff. And I'm looking at some channel-based marketing. And as I get into it, I'm realizing that none of the process of training, of being able to help somebody who isn't sitting inside of an office or isn't required because they're an employee to listen and train, like how do I get those people up to speed? And I started to get overwhelmed with thinking about all the little nuances of things that I had to build, and so I started to unpack those things into smaller little steps, and again started to really focus on those. But one of the things that happened during this process is I had a team member of mine that was really, I don't want to say negative, but just didn't really buy into what we were trying to do. And I felt like every time I had a conversation with them about this, it would result in an argument. And so I started to realize that my source of my frustration or my source of my angst at that moment wasn't entirely based upon the issue at hand, right? The issue of training these channel-based partners was definitely top of mind and definitely something that was impacting my mental psyche. But the fact that I was fighting internally with my own team around the strategy to go train and get these people up to speed further exacerbated this. And so what I did in this scenario is I sat down this team member and I just simply said, look, like this is what we're doing as a business. This is what we collectively as a management group decided is an effective tool. You seem to be not on board with this. Why? And what it turned out to be is like all these things that had to get done inside of it, they were trying to take on their shoulders as well. And so all the stress that I was feeling about having to go build all these things, they were also having to shoulder that responsibility. And it made me realize that when I further unpacked these things, I could then assign small mini components, if you will, of the broader goals and expectations. And then I said to this person, I said, look, like rather than you shouldering all of this, that's my job. Why don't you just take this little segment of it, you own this piece of it? And two things happened there. One, they had something that they could tangibly get on board, buy into, and go win at. It actually alleviated me because now I had one less component in the broader goal that I had to focus on, and I had somebody who had full ownership of that, and I trusted them to do it. And now my job got easier, and it made my stress better. And then what I started to do is I started to unpack things further, and I took these things that were causing me this angst, at least in my business, and I started assigning ownership to different people within the organization. Next thing you knew, I had this one broad goal that I broke down into 8 components. I took on 3 of them, and the other 5 I assigned out to 5 of my managers. Now I had 6 people really focused on these, these mini stories, if you will, inside of this one thing we were trying to do, and things got done quicker, things got done more efficiently. Did they get done exactly as I wanted them done? No, but they were good enough that everybody felt like they had, ownership. Everybody felt like they had a piece of the bigger goal and the bigger mission, and things got done quicker. Everybody's stress was less, and it was overall just a very positive experience. And while I'm still in it, right, I'm not out of this yet, I'm still in this very much. It just gave me like this breath of fresh air. This weight had been lifted off my shoulders, all because I just trusted the team to help accomplish these goals. So anyway, going back to the whole point here of today is really focusing on understanding when you have those moments of being down, why you're down. Is it a function of the business? Is it a function of the team? Is it a function of being overwhelmed? Understanding what it is that's causing that is the first step, and then being able to really unpack it into smaller, more digestible pieces, so that you can then either tackle them one by one or assign some out to other parts of your team. Like, all of those things really help you, so that these big, I guess, audacious goals that you have as an entrepreneur can be handled in a way that it doesn't cripple you and impact your ability to grow the business, because you're so just overwhelmed with what's going on. Anyway, I just wanted to share a little bit about what's happening in my world. Hopefully it helps you as you're starting to look through what's happening in your business. And again, only want to help one person a day, and hopefully that's you. So please remember to like and comment, and most importantly, share. If you have somebody else going through these same struggles, let's get through them together, everyone. Have a good day.